In Luke 18, verse 1 to 8, Jesus tells the parable of the persistent widow and the unjust judge. The widow persistently pleads her case for justice to the judge. He eventually grants her request, not because he cares about justice, but because of her persistence. Verse 1 of the chapter tells us that Jesus told the parable to teach about persistence in prayer. In today's video, we'll look at a few ideas expressed in the story to help us understand it better. Okay, so let's start by reading through the story in Luke 18, verse 1 to 8. Then he spoke a parable to them that men always ought to pray and not lose heart, saying, There was in a certain city a judge who did not fear God nor regard man. Now there was a widow in that city, and she came to him, saying, Get justice for me from my adversary. And he would not for a while, but afterward he said within himself, Though I do not fear God nor regard man, yet because this widow troubles me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. Then the Lord said, Hear what the unjust judge said. And shall God not avenge his own elect, who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? Okay, so as we get into the study, let's just read verse 7 again. It says, And shall God not avenge his own elect, who cry out day and night to him, though he bears long with them? So from this verse, we see that Jesus compares the justice that the persistent widow seeks with the justice that his people seek. For the widow, justice means vengeance against her adversary. There may have been an enemy that performed some evil act towards her. Justice for her would mean punishing the enemy for the evil done and equivalent to the evil that was done. So who is the adversary that God's people seek vengeance against? At the time that Jesus told this parable, the Romans were oppressing the Jews, and it may have been easy for their minds to lean in that direction and think of the Romans as the adversary of this comparison. But God never gave the Jews victory over the Romans. This ultimately led to the Jews rejecting Jesus as the Messiah. So the Romans can't be the adversary that Jesus was referring to. In Daniel 7, Daniel tells of a vision that God gave him. The vision is particularly interesting, especially in the context of the persistent widow, because it also has judgment as a key theme. In the vision, Daniel sees several creatures, and in Daniel 8, we read that these creatures refer to several kingdoms that would come into power one after the other. Daniel 2 shows a similar progression of kingdoms, except represented by different construction materials of a statue. Comparing these passages, we see Babylon being overtaken by Medo-Persia, Medo-Persia being overtaken by Greece, and then Greece being overtaken by another kingdom. The book of Daniel doesn't tell us the name of this fourth kingdom, but we know from history and by the historical context in which Jesus lived that the fourth kingdom is Rome. Daniel sees that the fourth kingdom will turn into a persecuting power. It becomes this first by blaspheming God, then changing God's law, and finally persecuting those who follow God rather than its dictates. We see this in Daniel 7 verse 8, 21, and 25. Let's read that. In verse 8 it says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. I was watching, and the same horn was making war against the saints and prevailing against them. And verse 25, He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. He shall persecute the saints of the Most High, and shall intend to change times and law. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So this hadn't happened yet during the time of Jesus. The Jews were at liberty to practice their faith, even though they were under the civil power of Rome. But during the Middle Ages, when part of the Christian church joined forces with Rome, Christians who remained true to the Bible were persecuted for their faith. The Protestant Reformation emerged from this period. Daniel sees this persecuting power severely persecuting God's people. It's during this time of great persecution that Daniel sees the judgment starting. Daniel 7 repeats the scene of the judgment 4 times, each time adding new details. Daniel 7 verse 8 to 10 speaks of the persecuting power blaspheming God, and then God, the Ancient of Days, sitting on his throne in the presence of millions of angels. It concludes by announcing that the judgment was set and the books were opened. Daniel 7 verse 11 to 14 again speaks of this persecuting power blaspheming God, and then when speaking of the judgment starting, it mentions one like the Son of Man coming to the Ancient of Days. It speaks of the Son of Man being given dominion over all the earth and putting an end to all the kingdoms before. And then the third time in Daniel 7 verse 20 to 22, it mentions the persecution that takes place, followed by the Ancient of Days coming and the judgment starting. The fourth time in Daniel 7 verse 25 and 26, it mentions that this evil kingdom is blaspheming, persecuting God's people, changing God's law, and ruling for a period of time, followed by the judgment starting and ending its reign. So 4 times a description of the persecuting power and its activities is presented, followed by the judgment starting. 4 times the judgment is presented as a solution to the persecution of God's people by the evil power. 4 times it's demonstrated that judgment will result in God avenging his people's persecution by putting an end to this evil power. We see in Daniel 7 verse 13 that the judgment includes the coming of the Son of Man. Jesus referred to himself multiple times as the Son of Man in the New Testament. This title may refer to the prophecy of Jesus given to Isaiah, and we read that in Isaiah 9 verse 6. It says, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." In John 14 verse 8 to 9, it also refers to him as the representative of the Father. It says, "Philip said to him," Philip was speaking to Jesus, "Lord, show us the Father, and it is sufficient for us." Jesus said to him, "Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" So this Son, the Son of God, a representative of the Father, was given to man for man's salvation and was born of man. And therefore he is the Son of Man. This Son of Man is seen by Daniel coming with clouds of heaven. But he doesn't come to the earth just yet. Daniel says that he came to the Ancient of Days to be a part of the judgment process. And after the parable of the persistent widow, when Jesus said that the Son of Man comes to avenge our adversary, he meant that he would come to the throne of God in heaven to conduct the judgment so that the persecuting power could be overthrown and sentenced for its evil activities. Now, something to note about the judgment. The sentence is given during the judgment, but the sentence is only executed once the judgment is complete and only after Jesus has returned to earth. While most people believe that the judgment will only start when Jesus returns to earth or at the end of the world, we see evidence in the Bible, or a lot of evidence in the Bible, for a judgment that takes place before the second coming of Jesus. For example, in Revelation 22 verse 12, Jesus says, "And behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me to give to everyone according to his work." Now, if Jesus already has the reward, surely he has decided on that reward through judgment prior to his return. In Revelation 14 verse 7, John sees an angel flying and shouting, "Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." So firstly, the judgment has started. And secondly, even though the judgment has started, the end has not yet come, and there is still an opportunity to change our lives. In Revelation 6 verse 9 to 11, we see a scene, a symbolic scene of people who seek judgment for being persecuted. They are rewarded with white robes. In other words, they are judged worthy of receiving the white robes. However, they are told to rest yet a little season. They are told to rest yet a little season. until their fellow servants also and their brethren that should be killed as they were should be fulfilled. Again, judgment takes place. A sentence is given, in this case a white robe, a positive sentence. And the sentence is executed at some later stage. Notice here in Revelation 6 verse 11 that it speaks of more people being persecuted in the future. And right now in 2024, religious freedom is quite widespread. There are pockets of places where Christians are persecuted for what they believe. But in general, there is religious liberty throughout the world. After the Middle Ages, the persecuting power subsided. Revelation 13 verse 3 speaks of this power and says that this power was wounded. However, it also says that the wound will be healed. So while persecution has died down, it will rise again. Revelation 13 verse 16 to 17 tells us that this persecution will come in the form of economic pressure. Those who follow man rather than God will be given the mark of the beast, 666. Those who choose to follow God will not receive this mark and as a consequence will not be able to buy and sell. When this takes place, Revelation 6 verse 11 will be fulfilled. Christians will again be killed, perhaps through starvation for not being able to buy and sell, or perhaps through outright murder for choosing to follow God rather than the powers that be. Now this takes us back to the last statement that Jesus made after telling the parable of the persistent widow. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, that is, during the judgment, shall he find faith on the earth? The question is, will there be people on earth who will be counted righteous by the judgment? Romans 1 verse 17, Galatians 3 verse 11, and Hebrews 10 verse 38 tell us that the just shall live by faith. That is, those who are counted righteous in the judgment will receive that pronouncement because they have lived by faith. Deuteronomy 8 verse 3 and Matthew 4 verse 4 tell us that man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. If we combine these two ideas, we see that we live by doing as God says, and that faith is doing what God says. Hebrews 11 gives us the definition of faith and provides several demonstrations of faith. Hebrews 11 verse 7 says that by faith Noah prepared an ark to the saving of his household. Hebrews 11 verse 17 says that by faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises offered up his only begotten son. Hebrews 11 verse 23 says, by faith Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months by his parents, and they were not afraid of the king's command. Each of these demonstrations, and there are many more in Hebrews 11, each of these demonstrations show us that faith is doing what God says rather than following the prevailing views or instructions of men. To live by faith is to live by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. To live by faith is to do as God says. To live by faith is to follow the commandments of God rather than the commandments of men, even in the face of persecution. In James 2, James mentions a few of the commandments and then says this: so speak and so do as those who will be judged by the law of liberty. If faith is doing what God says, then keeping God's commandments is the test of faith. It is the standard by which we are judged. James also calls God's law the royal law and reiterates what Jesus said about the law, that love is the fulfillment of the law and that love for God and love for man is the ultimate goal. The 10 Commandments are a fleshing out of God's law of love. When we love God supremely and we love our neighbor as ourselves, we also keep the 10 Commandments. If we break any of the commandments, we do not love God supremely nor our neighbor as ourselves. Hebrews tells us that the new covenant is God writing his law on our hearts. That's in Hebrews 10 verse 16. It says, this is the covenant that I will make with them after those days, says the Lord. I will put my laws into their hearts, and in their minds I will write them. God is working in our lives to prepare us for heaven, to prepare us for judgment, and to make us good citizens of this world and of the next. If we are persistent in prayer, this new covenant promise will be fulfilled in us. Doing what is right will become a part of who we are. Jesus will find faith on the earth when our names come up in the judgment. We will be persecuted for what we believe, but justice will be served and we will be avenged of our adversaries, just like the persistent widow.